guys, it's Kathy. I hope you're doing well. I blame Donald because he said he wanted to see the ever changing story part two. I don't know my internet. I had to reboot my modem, which kicked me out of my live stream. All right, so we're still here. I know the picture's coming down soon, and we're gonna see the courtroom soon. I know it. Just hang in there, guys. I know. I don't know.
Correct, she was not.
She was not among that high risk,
No.
right? So, and when you were talking about the mechanisms of injury, you were talking about the types of force that, right, in an assault that could fracture skull, right? It could
Correct.
fracture bones.
Yes.
Or the types of forces that are generated in a car accident.
Yes.
Based on your training, your experience, your specialization area, is something like a fall from standing generally sufficient to generate that kind of force?
Objection. Well, let me just ask the doctor, does that take a biomechanical engineer to answer a question like that, or can you, within your area of specialty, answer that in your opinion?
I can. I mean, from what I've seen in my practice, is a fall from standing can.
So a mattress fell on my internet. Guys, you won't believe it. I know. It's crazy. But a mattress fell right onto my internet.
Lead to a brain hemorrhage. It's going to be more commonly in older patients, more commonly in those who are on anticoagulants or antiplatelets. But a fall from standing could lead to a type of hemorrhage in the brain.
Do you withdraw your objection, or do you want me to just overrule it?
I did. I put the link in.
I'll withdraw.
Okay.
And so just so we're clear, in terms of those sort of qualifiers you put on there for age or for other medical conditions, Ms. Klinker did not have any of those.
Correct.
Now, I want to go back to, I think we talked a little bit about your discussion with Ms. Klinker about her explanation of the mechanism of how this injury occurred. I think you talked a little bit about why you were concerned about that. So if you could explain, based on your experience, you're dealing with trauma patients, and your medical expertise, what was it that concerned you about her explanation of how this injury occurred?
To me, it didn't really seem as plausible that a mattress could fall and she would land and this would all happen. This seemed like a very directed force to that area of the eye. And then I also knew what she had told the triage nurses as well. There wasn't a lot of other indications that this would have been like a total body injury or fall. Like, people will like reach out to like catch themselves with their hands. So there'll be like abrasions usually on people's hands if they fall. And then just her demeanor, she's just very tearful, didn't want to discuss the mechanism, and it just, my primary concern was just telling her that this was a bad injury and this is going to happen again in a worse way, was my concern.
I did not specifically cover this, but in terms of the subarachnoid hemorrhage that Ms. Klinker suffered on that day, is that, based on your experience, is that the kind of injury that, if left untreated, could result in a serious permanent injury or death?
I don't think hers was severe enough for that to be the case, but there is a spectrum of subarachnoid hemorrhage. So, if it was a lot worse, then absolutely for certain, yes.
Looking at this injury, and I know there was a medical diagnosis that this was an acute injury. It happened fairly recently in the past. an injury of this severity to the eye bones,
Take
would
my
you expect,
money.
based on your medical experience and training, that the injury would become apparent, like in terms of swelling and bruising thing, within a fairly short period of time?
Yes.
And when we say a fairly short period of time, say within an hour or something like that, would she have presented with that kind of bruising and swelling?
Probably not within an hour. I don't think the bruising would have been this bad. I think, it's always, you can never say for 100% certain when you're timing bruises and things
Yeah.
like that, but, probably within an hour, it just would have been like really painful, maybe some abrasion, but, people, like, bruising looks worse usually the next day on everybody. And then 1 to 3 days, it looks really terrible and swollen. Then it starts to get better, so.
I think you did sort of touch on this previously, but based on your experience, that if Miss Klinker had fallen on a flat surface, say face first, like a frontal face injury, would you have expected an injury to her nose?
Either her nose or chin, mouth, something on her hands or her knees where she would have like tried to catch herself. Again, it's not always like 100%, but it just didn't quite, to me, match. That's why I wanted to have the conversation with her about her safety.
So no injuries to elbows, wrists, knees,
No.
attempts to catch herself.
Except we're going to see pictures tomorrow that have bruises all over her arms. At least arm.
Not that I saw her documented, no.
Okay.
Which he says is just a shadow.
Now, based upon the outcome of the CT scans, what treatment did you engage in with Ms. Klinker?
So she had a subarachnoid hemorrhage. She had 3 facial fractures. So I consulted our trauma surgeon who was there at the hospital. They see all patients who have different types of brain hemorrhages. I consulted neurosurgery because they will follow these patients as well. And then I consulted our who was on for face
I don't like
surgery,
being friends.
and that rotates between ear, nose, and throat. Oral maxillofacial surgery and plastic surgery. Just depends on the day. So they all take care of face fractures.
I know that you said you were working a 2 to 10 shift that day. At 10 o'clock, did you transfer her care to, it looks like a Dr. Tyler Paulson?
Yes.
And after that time, 10 o'clock, did you have any other contact with Ms. Klinker?
No.
Those are all the questions I have for you. Thank you, Doctor.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gibb, we're just going to take 3 minutes here to handle this one matter.
All right, now the picture goes away. I'm
I'm sorry?
100% sure.
Yes.
There, it went away.
Hello, Dr. Kreitzer, am I saying that right?
So what I cut out right there, I cut out a bunch so far, guys. It was just mostly her CV and, her training and all that. But what I just cut out right there was an inmate who came in who wanted to fire his lawyer, his second lawyer. So it was a public defender. They gave him one before, and he didn't like that one. So he went in front of the judge and said, "Get me a new one." Judge gave him a new one. Now he's again saying, "Judge, get me a new lawyer." And the judge is like, "No, not this time, buddy."
Yes, sir.
My name is Jonathan Gibbs. I'm counsel on behalf of the defendant in this matter. And I just have a few follow-up questions for you. To start, earlier in your testimony, you mentioned
This gray screen goes away too. We're going to see the court again. We are.
reviewing the record. How well did you prepare to provide testimony today?
I went into Epic and read basically my note that I had written, just to refresh myself.
Okay. And did you talk about it with anyone else or anything like that?
No.
Moving on, You mentioned earlier prescribing pain medication. When you provide pain medication, do you ask a patient about possible alcohol consumption that day?
Sometimes. It just depends. So one, like in this case, one Percocet, for example, if we're going to have her staying with us and she's a patient that's going to be monitored, even if they have had some alcohol that day, if they were to get sleepy or anything like that, we would be able to treat them essentially. And then also with like a subarachnoid hemorrhage or any kind of undifferentiated trauma patient, we're not able to give them a lot of the non-opiate pain medications, like I don't know, ibuprofen, for example, due to the antiplatelet effects.
Okay, great. The prosecution's brought up that Ms. Klinker, and I'm sure many patients rate their pain pretty high. In your experience as a ER doctor, do you ever find that patients rate their pain higher subjectively in an attempt to probably obtain?
Absolutely, yes. 10, Doc, 10. How is your 10? He doesn't even have to finish the question. What is your pain level? 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 11. Just if you're new. This is her. This is Klinker. And in this picture, it looks like her eye is still bad, but I think that's just this picture. Or maybe her eye is still bad because, her skull was broken in 3 places. This is the prosecutor. This is him over here. And this is his attorney. You're right. But everybody loves pain medication, except for a couple of people in chat.
More pain medication?
Sometimes patients do, but I just always have to take them at their word at the end of the day if they're having a lot of pain. So.
Okay, well, that's fair. Did you check Ms. Klinker's blood sugar?
She had her blood sugar checked. I don't remember what it was, but it was as part of her electrolyte panel. Her glucose would have been on there, yes.
Okay. What is the process for admission to the hospital for a patient?
So a patient, if they're seen in the emergency department, if they require admission to the hospital, then they would be admitted. At Westchester specifically, it's usually just to like 1 or 2 different services. We have a hospitalist service who would admit the patient. Trauma surgery also admits their own patients. But a lot of our subspecialists, for example, will admit under the hospitalist service. So the process would be that we would have to talk with like the specialist or the subspecialist, and then also potentially to the hospitalist, and communicate what happened to the patient, what their injuries or illness is, what we've done for them in the emergency department, what we anticipate they require admission for, and then they get a bed assigned, and nursing does their own sign out to another nurse that will take care of them, and then they're given a bed in the hospital.
Okay. So is it typically kind of based on the severity of whatever the patient is experiencing at that time?
Typically, yes.
Okay. And just to be clear, Ms. Klinker was not admitted to the hospital.
She was not admitted
correct?
to the hospital, no.
Okay, thank you. Earlier you mentioned, and it certainly makes sense to me, that falling face first on the floor wouldn't lead to a black eye typically. Is that correct?
It can, it's possible. It's in isolation would be a little less typical.
Yeah, and again, I'm just referring when you were asked the question, about if someone fell face first on the floor, would that typically, or would it seem to be that something caused trauma to cause a black eye?
Correct.
Was that your earlier testimony?
Yes.
Okay.
I freaking love nurses, and I absolutely appreciate the hell out of nurses, and I can't imagine doing that job because, people get pissed off at me when I don't give them ranch. And I can't imagine how pissed off people get when they don't get their morphine. You know what I mean? And you're trying as hard as you can, and you're running around all day, and it's a thankless job. Yes, some people thank nurses. That's true. But I think most nurses only hear the negatives. I wish the nurses would only hear just the positives, that people love them, and not the negatives. Like, you didn't look at my daughter's left eye when I told you to. Uh, yeah, I love crazy nurses the best. I love crazy nurses.
Based on that, would an injury such as Miss Clinker's that you just saw a few minutes ago, would that be possible from falling into a piece of furniture or possibly a hard plastic tote container or something of that nature, something with an edge on it?
It's possible.
Okay. You also mentioned, as far as, and forgive me, they say if you're smart enough to become a doctor, you don't become a lawyer. So I'm bad with the terms, but you'd mentioned hemorrhaging and you'd mentioned, brain bleed, those things. And you'd mentioned concerning those things how age can be an increased risk factor.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Does someone who's been diagnosed as diabetic, does that increase their risk factor for these things?
Not for brain hemorrhages, typically, no.
Does it impact the risk at all for bleeding likeliness or anything along those lines?
It can if they are diabetic and they have other like end organ damage. For example, like if they have kidney damage, then their platelets may not function as well. So they could have increased risk of bleeding or ongoing bleeding.
Okay. The prosecution asked you about the CT scan. Are there any scans that you order that would provide more detail than a CT scan?
I suppose that an MRI would provide more detail, but in this type of scenario would be unnecessary.
And why is that?
You can see the hemorrhage on the CT scan, and also her exam. She was awake, she was alert, she was oriented. I didn't suspect that there was a second process that was going on that would not be visible on a CT scan. So like an ischemic stroke, for example, wouldn't show up on a CT scan, so.
Okay, so would it be fair to say if you thought there was something more significant going on that the CT would miss, you would have ordered an MRI or maybe an fMRI or something like that?
So if her exam didn't match the CT scan, that would be the indication that I might get additional imaging. So like, this is less common in the emergency department, but for example, in the neuro ICU, sometimes we'll have patients with traumatic brain injuries who have a CT scan that doesn't look that bad, but the patient's exam is bad. There are injuries that can be missed on a CT scan. It's not perfect. So,
Zach, thank you so much. I love pizza. You're the best.
like diffuse axonal injury is one that comes to mind that's common. It's just like a shearing of like the nerves as you have like a quick like force forward or backwards, and may not show up on a CAT scan. So we don't really have access to functional MRIs, fMRIs, like you mentioned. I mean, sure, like if I really wanted to go look for one, I could get one, but wouldn't really have a reason to. But that would be an example where like an MRI might get ordered.
Okay, thank you. In your medical opinion, was the fracture that Ms. Clinker experienced the severe fracture?
I think so, yeah. That's kind of a hard question to answer. In 3 fractures of the face that seems severe to me, so.
Pretty easy to answer.
Would it likely require surgery or serious medical intervention?
So generally for a lot of facial fractures at the time of injury, it's not known if they'll require surgery. A lot of like face surgeons will wait a week or 2 weeks and make that determination depending on how it's healing. So usually not something we could say for certain in the ER.
Same question, but on the brain bleed. In your medical opinion, was Ms. Clinker's brain bleed, was that a serious event or was it relatively minor?
In terms of brain bleeds, it was on the minor spectrum for sure. But there is a spectrum, and a subarachnoid hemorrhage that had been larger or in a different area of the brain could have been very serious.
Okay. I know the prosecutor talked to you about your conversation with Ms. Clinker at the hospital. And I just wanted to clarify, did she say to you that she was assaulted?
She didn't tell me that I remember, no.
Did she say that she was hit, pushed?
I don't remember her telling me that, no.
Okay.
Not to me.
Earlier, the prosecution was asking you concerning bruising and injury impacts. I'm sure you recall that.
Yes.
When typically does bruising and such peak?
Usually like day 1 to day 3 has been my experience with seeing patients. Most of the time in the ER, patients come in like same day or the day after an injury, but in the neuro ICU, we kind of get to see them for a long period of time. So I would say usually that the bruises and the swelling is at its worst on average, probably like day 3.
So in your opinion, and I know this is maybe a difficult question, but in your opinion, do you believe that Ms. Klinker's injury at its status when you saw it would line up with it having happened within the previous 24 hours?
Yes, that seemed reasonable.
Okay. Again, you'd mentioned at the prosecutor's questions concerning when people fall, oftentimes there's injuries to elbows, knees, nose, what have you. Is that correct?
Yes.
In your experience as a medical doctor and ER physician, do you ever find that can vary depending on if an individual is intoxicated when they fall?
It could, or if they pass out first and then they fall, they may not be as likely to catch themselves.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Redirect.
Thank you, John. Mr. Gibbs was asking you about sort of that pain assessment, that subjective
Yes.
statement. That's right. The patient's going to give you their subjective
Yes.
rating of what their pain is, right? But just of what you know of the injuries to Ms. Klinker, I mean, would you expect a significant amount of pain if there are 3 facial fractures and swelling?
For sure.
And would you expect there to be significant pain if a person has an internal traumatic brain injury?
It depends. The brain itself doesn't have pain fibers.
Okay.
But if you've hit your head and like the scalp, skull, things like that, or bruised or sore, then yes, you could definitely have a headache from that. So.
And just so we're clear, in your examination of Ms. Klinker, she didn't complain of any other like external hit to her head or something like that, right? She didn't have a knot or
No.
nothing, no other external injury to her head, skull area.
No.
So in terms of what she complained of and what you saw in terms of your examination, the area of impact is localized to her right eye.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Gibbs asked you that if there were a fall where a person were to fall, say, into a piece of furniture, right, or onto a plastic tote, would you expect, based on your experience with treating trauma patients, that you would have some other sorts of lateral marking or indications of an edge strike or something like that?
It's possible, yeah, depending on what you landed on, I guess. So.
So, but you weren't given, I mean, in terms of what Ms. Klinker expressed to you, did she ever tell you she fell and hit a piece of furniture?
No.
Did she ever tell you she fell on a plastic tote?
No.
Did she tell you what she struck her face on?
All she said was that she'd been hit by a mattress, and that was it. And then I had known that she had told triage that she'd been assaulted. So.
Okay. So, because I think there's been some maybe discussion around this. She was not expressing to you that a mattress hit her and the mattress is what caused the injury or something else?
She didn't really elaborate
Okay.
as to what happened with the mattress.
But in terms of your assessment and your concerns, looking at the claim that a mattress fell on her or a mattress hit her, and looking at the statement that this was an assault, based on your experience and your
It's stupid, JK, because this is not a jury trial. This is a bench trial, and the judge isn't stupid. He knows that it's possible and not possible. It's possible and not all these things are possible. You know, he doesn't listen to it. He doesn't give any weight at all to those questions in the slightest.
Medical looked more like an assault, right?
Yes.
Object to that.
Well, I don't know that it's something that is improper so much as it is the weight of the testimony in this case. So that's kind of she's boxed in to answer that yes or no.
No. Was the judge listening to us? Judge, were you listening to us?
Whether it looked like more like A or B, I don't think is all that relevant.
Thank you, Judge. And finally, I think Mr. Gibbs asked you about if a person had diabetes, would that impact their bruising and that sort of thing? And I think you said, well, it depends if they had organ damage, right?
Yes.
If they had
That was
other
crazy.
some medical condition that impacted their ability to process their plate.
Correct.
I'm not going to pretend to be a doctor, but I think that's what you said. But when Ms. Klinker was admitted, she was at the hospital for like 8 hours, right? I mean, she was there long after you left her care. Based upon your review of the medical records, any indication that she has any kind of organ failure?
No, not that I can remember.
And that's the sort of thing that, like, when you do those labs, right, when
Yes.
you're testing those things, if someone was having kidney failure, it would be apparent
Yes.
from those labs, correct?
Yes.
And there's nothing in the medical records that indicates
No.
that? Okay. No indication from her medical history or the records that you have, the testing that you did today, that indicate that she had some underlying medical condition related to her diabetes that would impact her bruising or anything like that?
No, not that we saw.
Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Recross,
Nothing further.
I do have a question, Doctor.
Yes.
I've circled under 2901.01 the A factors listed as A, B, C, D, and E. If you would tell me if there are any factors in that particular section
Judge, you have to show the lawyers that first. You just can't hand the witness a piece of paper. Judge.
that apply in this situation. I guess you just go through and either rule out A, in or out A or B.
Okay. Okay, so serious physical harm to persons means any of the following. So A, I would say no. It says any mental illness or condition of such gravity as would normally require hospitalization or prolonged psychiatric treatment. She did not require hospitalization. B, any physical harm that carries a substantial risk of death. I would say no. Any physical harm that involves some permanent incapacity, whether partial to, no. Any physical harm that involves some permanent disfigurement or that involves some temporary serious disfigurement. I would say that was not known at the time that I saw her in the emergency department, not knowing how the facial fractures would heal. Any physical harm that involves acute pain of such duration as to result in substantial suffering or that involves any degree of prolonged or intractable pain. I would say potentially, depending on how much pain she was having.
Okay, thank you.
You have a question for her?
Just as to that question, any follow-up, Mr. Bute?
I think the medical records do indicate during the time that she was under that care that she did continue to express that 10 out of 10 pain for a substantial period of time.
Yes.
And she received a series of not just the medications you prescribed, but then later Dr. Coulson also prescribed her pain medication. She expressed to Dr. Coulson that she needed more pain medication during the time that she was present at the hospital.
Yes.
And when she was discharged from the hospital, she was discharged with a prescription for pain medication.
Yes.
And that, I mean, she was still expressing at the time she was discharged that she was in pain.
Yes.
She
Nothing
still is
further.
today.
I'll just ask a quick follow-up on that. Just to clarify, the pain medication that she was given in the hospital and prescribed, I believe you testified earlier, it was the lowest dose of
Yes.
oxycodone, is that correct?
Yes.
And any subsequent, she never received any higher dose, did she?
I would have to double check and look, but I don't think so.
Anything else, Mr. View?
No, nothing on that, Judge. Thank
All right, Doctor, thank you very
Thank
much for
you.
coming in.
you.
You're excused.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, let's go ahead and, since Jim's here yesterday.
Now we're gonna grab the nurse that handled her.
Might as well leave those up there. We're going to need them for the next couple of witnesses.
Today is all the medical staff. Tomorrow we get him on the stand and we get the body cam of when the police came. It's really good.
Standing, please raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in today's case to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And see if this is your name up here. This is the pointer of the truth after you just press this. Okay. And hold water. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming again. Second.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Apologize. Sometimes we don't have control of our schedule.
I know, it's fine.
If you could, please state your name for the court reporter. Spell your first and last name.
Jennifer Wisman, JenniferWiesmann.
And how are you employed, ma'am?
I work at UC Westchester in the emergency room as a staff nurse.
And what education do you have that qualifies you to be a staff nurse?
I have an associate's degree in nursing. I also have an extra associate's degree in EMS because I'm a paramedic as well. And then I have a bunch of certifications like board certified emergency nurse,
Okay.
trauma nurse, advanced cardiac life support.
And do you have a nursing license in the state of Ohio?
Yes,
And how long have you worked as a nurse, Ms. Wiseman?
4 years.
And where are you currently employed as a nurse?
UC Westchester Hospital in the emergency room.
And how long have you been there?
Next month it'll be 2 years.
And what's the position that you currently hold at UC Westchester?
Just an emergency room nurse, so caring for patients in the emergency room only.
Do you have a specific responsibility assignments there? How does that work? You show up, you get scheduled for a shift, and they tell you where to go, or what?
Yeah, so I work 7A to 7P, so you'll be scheduled by the charge nurse, and then it could be 4-hour
I
increments.
have
For
done that.
instance, you could do 4 hours in triage 1, 4 hours in triage 2, and 4 hours in trauma. Or you could just be 12 hours in one assignment. That's just up to the charge nurse and the staffing that day.
Okay. And so you don't know until you show up to work what you'll be doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes
An elephant.
until that moment, every 4 hours we change. So I may not know until 11 o'clock if I'm moving or staying in my current space.
Okay. So you talked about, I assume these are 3 different responsibilities within the emergency
Yes.
department. Triage 1, triage 2, and trauma. Okay, if you could just tell the judge, what are each one of those things? What's triage 1, what's triage 2, and what's trauma?
Triage 1 is when you first check in at the window in the emergency room, you basically get registered, a brief registration, and then you go to the next window to the triage 1 nurse, who then takes your chief complaint and asks just brief questions. We do have to ask if you're homicidal or suicidal, which is kind of a privacy concern because they're still in the waiting room and a lot of people don't want to say yes to that if they are. And then triage 2, you technically go to the waiting room after triage 1. When the 2 nurse is ready for you, we call you back in a privately secured area and we do more questioning like what's your medical history, allergies, explain, more detailed what their chief complaint is and assess the patient, because sometimes what they say is not the problem and it's something else. Then further down, you'll ask safety questions, if they're safe at home. And if they say yes, then you proceed with the next question, which would be, is somebody abusing you or harming you? And then if that's flagged as a yes, then I don't like to send them back out to the waiting room because I don't know who's with them. And that's why we like to question them alone. And then you also ask, you figure out an acuity on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 would be death, 5 would be you really don't need to be here. And then that helps flag the other staff and the physicians, this person needs to come back, they can wait, or they can really wait.
Now, I think you kind of covered a couple of my questions in a row there, so, okay. All right, so we're here today to talk about your care for a patient by the name of Ashley Klinker that occurred on July the 25th of 2024. And I have in front of you is what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 1. It's been identified by other witnesses, but those are the medical records from the hospital on that day. Have you had an opportunity in preparation for your testimony to review those medical records?
I did review them a couple weeks ago when I first received the subpoena.
And would it assist you in your testimony if you were able to refer to those records?
Yes.
But separate and apart from that, do you also have a personal recollection of your interaction with the patient, Ashley Klinker, on that day? Do you recall what shift you were working? Do you always work 7A, 7P?
That's what I'm hired for, but sometimes I'll pick up extra, and it could be any time during the day, but it's usually day shift hours.
So on July the 25th of 2024, were you working that shift 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.?
Yes.
And you said that, among the assignments for that day, we're going to look at a time period starting around 4 o'clock, 4 p.m., when Ms. Klinker presented at the emergency department. And on that day, do you recall what your duty assignment was in terms of the emergency department?
Yeah, when I reviewed the medical records, I was the triage 2 nurse.
And so when we're going to talk about your responsibilities for triage 2, that's sort of what you've already described for the judge, right? After that initial check-in, that initial triage 1 questioning from the intake. Mm-hmm. So when you, if you could, just referring to to the records, I'm going to refer you to page 16 of the records. And if you could tell the court, when did you get assigned to care for Ms. Klinker?
At 16:31 hours. Wait, that's when triage 2 started. So it looks like I signed in at 17:05 to finish triage 2. Looks like Meg Walsh started the triage 2, and then at some point I jumped in to finish 17:05.
So in terms of your contact, do you recall if you had any contact with Ms. Klinker during that initial process, during triage 1? Do you have had any?
I don't recall. Typically, if we're really busy, I won't see what's happening at triage 1. The triage 1 nurse might say, hey, this person needs to come back immediately, or this is what's going on. But I don't recall hearing about this or even seeing her prior to triage 2.
Okay. So if you can just tell the court about what you recall of your initial contact with Ms. Klinker.
I do recall she was kind of in a state hysterical, very tearful, crying. And then when she was alone during triage 2, she seemed somewhat fearful. And then after asking the triage 2 safety questions, when she admitted that she did not feel safe and somebody was abusing her, she began to be very fearful and asked that the fiance stay in the waiting room so that she could see the doctor by herself.
So I just want, you said that I want to go back to your initial contact with her. On that day, do you recall what you observed of her physical condition when you first encountered her?
Yes, her right eye, as this image is showing, has a lot of redness and swelling and some bruising underneath. And I don't recall a time frame of when that happened, but it looks pretty fresh. So it doesn't look like it's old and staging bruising. It looked pretty recent.
Okay. So you were referring, just for the record, you were referring to State's Exhibit number 2, and that this looks accurate to you in terms of what you
Yes.
observed of injury when you first met her.
Yes.
So where was it that you first encountered her in terms of triage 2? Where were you when you first met her?
So in the triage 2 area, it's secured, so you have to enter, and then we have a little triage 2 area where we do vital signs and start charting. I was in that area when I first saw her.
Okay. And is that where you asked her those safety questions?
Yes.
And if you can explain sort of how do you approach that question? You just tell them, I've got to ask you these questions, or how?
Yeah, these are standard triage questions that we have to ask everybody. So you go through, and it's literally like a checklist. So you just kind of go through them, and if they answer something that flags, or if your gut instinct is telling you something, then you address it.
Okay. I want to kind of talk about each one of those.
Bill Henderson Jr., thank you so much. I appreciate it. I really, really do. I'm not going to charge you this month for using my name. Thank you.
Separately. So is this question, are you safe in your home, is that the first question you ask them when you're going down this list?
No, we start with the basic chief complaint, vitals, allergies, medical history, medications, and then at the bottom is the safety questions. So it's more towards the end of triage 2.
So based on the information, do you have access to the information that triage 1 and into the registration takes?
Yes.
Okay, so when you first encountered Miss Klinker, what was your understanding of why she was at the emergency department?
The triage 1 note said that she was there. I do review the triage 1 note as I'm going down because it's just the upper part of my charting, above my charting. So I did see that she had claimed that she fell and I guess struck her face there. But then when I had her in triage 2, that story changed.
Okay. So at least when you initially encountered her, you knew that she had a facial injury. You confirmed that when you saw her. And your understanding of that was that she had reported to triage 1 intake that it was due to a fall.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you go through when you were going through those questions with her, was she cooperative with you?
Yes, she was. She was kind of all over, labile, emotional, back and forth, but we got through the questions fine. And basically when they come to triage 2, I say, hey, I want to review, make sure this information's correct. You fell. Is that what happened? Can you explain in more detail? And then that's when the story changed after I got through the safety questions, because when that flagged that she was not safe and somebody was harming her, then I further questioned her.
Okay. So you go through, you were doing vitals, you discussed these things, and then towards the end is this safety question. And what is the actual question? I know it's listed in the report, in the records, as a sort of safe in home, but what's the actual question you ask? It's on the top of page 17 if you're looking at that.
Abuse indicators, screening, are you safe in home? Are you in immediate danger?
Okay. Is that what you actually say to her? Is that the words that you
I don't feel like are you in immediate danger would be the question that I ask. I do say, do you feel safe at home? And then is anyone harming you?
Okay. So when you asked her, are you safe in your home, what was Miss Klinker's response?
No.
And is that one of those things that was one of those flags that asked
Yes.
you, then you asked us additional questions? So, and then what was her response to, are you in danger at home?
Are you in immediate danger? She said yes.
Now, you said based on her responses to that, you asked her for more detailed account of how she was injured. What did she tell you about how she was injured?
That she was assaulted by her fiance and she didn't want him to know and she would like him to stay in the waiting room.
Okay. Now, when you say, did she use the word he assaulted me, or do you recall what she said or how?
I don't recall word by word.
Okay. And so you don't recall her saying he hit me with a bat or he did X, Y, or Z.
Right.
But she attributed it that he was responsible. He was the person who inflicted the injury.
Correct.
Okay. And did she give you any further explanation of how it happened that the injury occurred?
The only other explanation that I had is that she was assaulted by him, assuming him was who was with her in the waiting room because she didn't want him back.
Okay.
But then I did get later explanation that sometimes with his bipolar and drinking, this happens. It's common for that to happen.
Okay. She made a statement that this had happened previously.
Yes.
There were other incidents in which he had assaulted her.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to make an assumption because I'm not a doctor, I don't work in the medical field. I really don't watch hospital lawyer shows either, or doctor shows either, but I always get the sense that an emergency room can be kind of a chaotic, you never know what's going to come in the door kind of environment.
Correct.
And in your experience, your years of doing emergency medicine, do you often come in contact with people who are intoxicated?
Yes, on the regular.
I would assume so, right? So people who are under the influence of drugs, right?
Yes,
And people who have been consuming alcohol.
correct.
Based on your experience, the time that you spent with Miss Clinker that day, did she appear to be under the influence of drugs while you were there?
She appeared to be under the influence of alcohol, and part of my screening questions that I did not mention earlier are we get like a social history. Do you drink, smoke, do drugs? And she did say she drank 2 bottles of wine daily, and I think
Swear.
I documented that.
And did she tell you that she had been drinking on the day that the injury occurred?
No, I don't recall that.
Did she tell you that she had been drinking on the day that she presented to the emergency room?
I don't recall that.
Okay, but she did appear, based on your interaction with her.
My nursing judgment was she was intoxicated.
Okay. Okay. Now, you said after you talked with her, and I kind of want to be clear about your interaction with her. After she said that her fiance, her boyfriend, had inflicted the injury on her, assaulted her, what was the sort of nature of your interactions with her? Was it in conflict? Was she aggressive with you? Did she argue with you?
She did not argue. She was not aggressive, but it was very difficult to get this story because just from triage 1 to triage 2 with me, the story had changed. My nursing instinct, she was intoxicated, so it was really hard to follow her in what really was the problem or how the injury did occur specifically. But I just kept her in the triage 2 area, secured, and I did not let her reunite with the gentleman that was with her.
Was she expressing to you that she wanted to?
She was expressing to me not to let him back at all, that she wanted to at least get back and speak to the doctor before he came back.
Okay. So I guess we've heard testimony, a sort of an account of your interaction with her as if you bullied her. Do you feel like you bullied her?
No, not at all.
Did you berate her?
No.
Did you try to manipulate her into saying that her boyfriend hit her or hurt her?
Absolutely not.
council approach.
I
Ms. Clinker, can you hear me okay, ma'am?
Yes.
I have a rule, no texting.
I'm sorry, I've been talking to my dog.
Okay, I understand that. That's why I'm telling you now. No texting while you're in the courtroom.
Okay, I'm
All
sorry.
right, thank you.
Now, you said that she had asked to see the doctor privately. So did you make arrangements for that, to have a private room for her?
I did, and I kept her in a second triage area. We have like an extra triage 2 room that we don't really utilize that much. So I put her in that room, and there was a float nurse that day, which is just an extra nurse that doesn't.
So, in case you got bored and drifted off, she went into the emergency room. She got seen by a nurse. I know we heard the doctor's testimony, but before the doctor even saw her, she got seen by a nurse and said that he assaulted her. So they usually they check you out, they triage you, and they put you back out in the waiting room. She did not go back out in the waiting room because they were scared because he was there. So they sent her to a different room so that she could be safe. And they wouldn't have done that if, she had fallen down or a mattress fell on her.
Have an assignment, and I had her stay with her, and we were waiting on a room to open up and get cleaned, and then she walked her back to that room. So
Were you present when she met with Dr. Kreitzer?
No.
No, okay. Now, you said that after, I just want to make sure we sort of have in time the statements that Ms. Klinker said to you about how the injury occurred. So was there any other, after, I think you described that she didn't really describe in detail or specifically how the injury occurred, but that he had caused it. Did she ever make any other statements to you related to sort of the circumstances of how the injury occurred?
Not to me, but later I am aware that she changed the story for the physician.
Okay.
Your Honor, could I request that the exhibit be removed from the screen if it's not being referred to?
Domestic violence.
Okay.
I think I'm done with the witness, so I was just double checking. I'm sorry. Thank you, Ms. Weisman. I think those are all my questions.
Mr. Gibbs?
Nurse Wisman, my name's Jonathan Gibbs. I'm counsel for the defendant in this matter. I just have a few questions for you. Appreciate your time today. How at all did you prepare to provide for your testimony today?
I reviewed medical records, and I spoke to the prosecutor prior to this when I received my subpoena.
Okay. And other than the prosecutor, did you talk to any of the other nurses or anyone else?
Yes.
And what did you discuss with them?
Prior to this, after caring for the patient, or while the patient was in the ER, we all did speak about the patient. Is that what you're asking?
No, I just meant in preparation for your testimony today.
We all reviewed the medical records together.
Did you discuss the situation at all with the other nurses or anyone
Yes.
else? Okay. And what did those discussions look like?
It looked like my interaction with her was a completely different chief complaint later than with Karen, the nurse, and Dr. Kreitzer, the physician. So what she told me is different than what she told the third person, and it's different than what she told triage 1 prior to me.
Understand. So, and again, I just want to be real clear so I understand perfectly the best of your recollection for what that interaction looked like. If I understand, the first interaction is you asking those questions about feeling safe. Is that
Yes.
correct? And just a simple, her response?
was that she did not feel safe.
And did she say, "I don't feel safe," or did she say no? Did she shake her head?
Just like the medical records say, she said that she is not safe in her home and she is in immediate danger, and that's what I documented.
Okay. I believe I know the answer to this, but was there any recording of this interaction that you're aware of?
Like physical recording?
Yes.
No.
Okay, so no recording
Like
of it?
videotaping type?
Any recording whatsoever?
Not that I'm aware of. We don't do that. That's a HIPAA privacy concern.
Of course. You mentioned that she appeared under the influence in your earlier testimony. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what led you to that conclusion?
The smell on her breath would be the first indicator, but then, you know, her labile behaviors, I expected her to be crying and upset if she was assaulted and the assailant was with her, and it's a crisis for her at the time, so I do expect her to be upset, but she was very labile. We would go from crying to angry to changing the story multiple times, and her emotions were more exaggerated than what you would normally expect with someone.
You're going to have to forgive my ignorance, but can you define labile?
Yes,
Not
it's
forgiven.
basically emotions all over. People can go from happy to sad to angry to fearful to crying, just drastic changes in emotions
Lean
for
as
no
you
rhyme
are.
or reason.
Gotcha. You mentioned that after Ms. Clinker told you she didn't feel safe at home, you did not let her reunite with Mr. Back. Is that correct?
That's correct. I did not personally.
Okay. And did you tell any other staff to keep them from reuniting, or?
I did. Meg, the floating nurse who was kind of keeping an eye on her while we were getting a room available, I told Meg was present with her, more so after triage 2 than I was, because I had to continue my role as triage 2. But then when Meg took her back to the nurse in C-Pod that was going to be caring for her, she relayed the information, but like a couple minutes later, I went back to verify that Karen knew the situation.
Okay. Did you have any personal suspicion about the situation before you asked her the questions?
Yes,
And why was that?
her behavior. The type of injury that she had and the stories changing by the time I had her, the smell of alcohol, the questioning, my nurse instinct was saying something's not right.
And again, just going back to your interaction with Ms. Clinker specifically, I understand that she said, and I don't want to get mixed up, but no, I don't feel safe at home. And yes, I feel at risk. Did she specifically say anyone hit her?
Yes, she specifically said her fiance, Mr. Beck.
And how did she say that exactly?
Wow, angrily knitting.
She said that her fiance, who was in the waiting room, assaulted her. This is not word for word. This is the general, because it's not documented word for word. But what I recall is her fiance, Mr. Back, that was in the waiting room, assaulted her. And later in questioning, she had told me that he has done this before when his bipolar is uncontrolled and he's drinking alcohol.
And did you report this situation to law enforcement?
I did not.
Any reason why not?
Because I was triage 2 and typically the flow is really high, my job was to keep her in a private secured area, and then the nurse that's assigned to her would most likely address that, or the physician.
Have you ever reported suspected domestic violence in the past
Yes,
to law enforcement?
yes. If I'm caring, if I'm assigned to the patient, not in triage 1 or triage 2, but if you're the assigned nurse, you should, and that's when I have.
Okay. And is that hospital policy?
Yes.
No further questions.
Nothing on the record. Okay.
I want to see if you could help me on this.
Yeah.
There are different classifications, legal classifications, and I'm trying to find which area exactly this involves. And it boils down to physical harm that involves acute pain. Acute means immediate.
Right.
Of such a duration as to result in substantial suffering or that involves any degree of prolonged or intractable pain. Can you tell me if, from what you know about this injury, if it fits the definition of prolonged or intractable pain?
Yes. I'm not a physician, but she did have an orbital fracture. Any type of fracture, which is a break, you can have prolonged pain or recurring
I would rather have a colonoscopy, Donald.
symptoms. I know that she had blurred vision with it, with all the swelling. I'm unsure
But
to
I
the
love you.
extent the physician would have to answer that for you. But yes, and she had a head bleed, so you could have headaches afterwards. It could not resolve on its own. If you strike your head again, it could bleed more and cause more serious injury. But more so the orbital fracture, that can be prolonged.
Okay, so the question is, in this case, would that, in your mind, require some evidence or documentation of it lasting for a prolonged period or intractable?
That would be something the physician would document, not the nurse. So more upon her discharge. After we know the injuries, the physician can put referrals in to, since it was an orbital fracture, maybe she needs to see ophthalmology or neurology with the head bleed. And then it can say, expect these symptoms to resolve, or it could say expect these symptoms to linger, but you need to follow up with the referrals.
Are you aware of any record that reflects one way or the other on that?
No.
Okay. All right, Mr. View, any follow-up questions?
Not for this witness, Judge.
Mr.
Nothing
Gibbs?
further, Your Honor.
All right, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Your Honor, the state calls Karen Galla.
All right, last nurse, Karen.
Remain standing. Please raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in today's case to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So
Of course she's blonde, she's a nurse.
have a seat. This is your
Just go ahead and get yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
Be right back, guys, and behave.
Good morning. If you could state your name, please, spell your first and last name for the court reporter.
Karen Galla, Karen Galla.
And how are you employed?
I work at UC Health up at the Westchester Hospital.
In
the
what
emergency
capacity?
department.
Sorry.
In the emergency department, I'm a nurse.
Okay. And I'm not a medical professional. I think there's different levels of nurse, LPN, RN.
I'm an RN.
Okay, registered nurse. And so what's your education that qualifies you to be a registered nurse?
I graduated from nursing school at UC in 2013, was licensed shortly thereafter in the summer, and then last year completed my BSN as well.
Okay, and what's that?
Bachelor's of Science in Nursing.
Okay. And so have you been employed continuously since 2013 as a registered nurse?
Yes.
And I just want to talk a little bit about some of your other experience nurse. What are there specific areas of nursing that you have practiced during your time period?
Well, we can start at the beginning. I started nursing right out of school. When I got licensed, I worked at Eastgate Springs, which is a long-term care facility, and shortly after that, started working at UC at the main campus downtown on med-surg floor that was devoted to orthopedics and trauma. After that, I moved to Texas with my family and worked on a telemetry floor there. I also worked as a discharge nurse. I worked cardiac step-down. And then when I came back to Cincinnati, I worked cardiac step-down again at Mercy Hospital briefly before I came back to UC and started working med-surg there. I was also a nursing supervisor downtown at the Ridgeway Tower before coming up to the Westchester Hospital in the emergency department, which was 2022.
So it sounds like you've had a pretty broad range
Correct.
of experiences in nursing. How long have you been doing emergency medicine?
Since 2022.
And I mean, like in any profession, there's sort of acronyms or slang terms there. When you say med surge, what's med surge?
Medical surgical floor, it's acute care medicine. Generally, it's the lowest acuity in the hospital, but generally the largest volume of patients.
And I know we've sort of learned from some of your colleagues the way you get scheduled for shifts or where. So do you only work at UC Westchester or do you work at several facilities?
I only work at UC Westchester.
And do you have a set shift that you work?
I work day shift. That's my contracted, if you will,
Okay.
time that I spend there. My full-time employment is day shift, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Okay. So, Ms. Galla, we're here today to talk about your care for a patient named Ashley Klinker that occurred on July the 25th, 2024. In front of you is what's been marked as State's Exhibit Number 1. Those have been previously identified as the medical records for her care at UC Westchester on that day. Have you had an opportunity to review those medical records of her care?
Not recently, but I have certainly discussed with my colleagues who also had a care of her that day.
And so this kind of came up during Ms. Wisman's testimony, and so I just want to make sure that we're clear about a couple of things. There are records of your actions that are captured in the records themselves, right? You chart things.
Correct.
Exactly, right? And so you've had an opportunity to review those chart things.
Yes, I did so before, I believe when I was first contacted by the court.
And when you say the court, that's actually me, right?
Correct.
You and I talked.
Well, it was before that. I think Sydney,
That's my secretary, yeah.
your secretary,
Yeah.
contacted me, yes, closer to the time of the incident, back in September, I think.
Okay.
And that's, at that time, I did review the chart myself in real time
Okay.
at the hospital.
Now, and then separate from that, you and I talked on the telephone.
Correct.
Kind of reviewed the things that were in the record and.
Correct.
right? Separate from the records, do you also have an independent recollection of your interactions with Ms. Klinker on that day?
I do.
And sort of this, again, this sort of came up with Ms. Wisman. It sounds like some of the nurses that were involved in Ms. Klinker's care reviewed the records together. Did that?
I'm not aware of
Okay.
that, but certainly when we are moving patients, the way the emergency department works, patient comes through the front door and they check in at a triage desk with registration first, and then they see the first triage nurse, then they come back for a more involved triage, and especially when we're very busy, there could be an official triage nurse, and then there could be several other nurses who are helping to just facilitate movement in the emergency department, who we certainly, like I said, we certainly discussed Ms. Klinker's situation at the time.
At the time?
Yes.
So in preparation for your testimony today, though, did you get together with any of your other colleagues to look at the records and talk about it?
Not to look at the records, no.
Okay.
Again, we've had casual conversations about it, but the way that our work is, it's pretty, like, you have to be in the moment that you're in versus versus the one from July.
Correct. Okay, I didn't, so here's the thing for today's testimony. Obviously, I want you to use the medical records that we
Yes.
have there to help refresh your recollection, the things that you charted. But also, in terms of your testimony today, if there are things that you recall from your own personal recollection, make sure you let us know that.
Yes.
If there are things that you're like, well, you know, Meg said this, or Jim said that, or I heard from Wendy this, and and it's not something that you remember or that you experienced, right?
Correct.
Something that's not in the chart. Will you let us know that? So, because that we want to focus on what your experience was with the patient.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So you said that you work the day shift 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Were you working that shift on July the 25th of 2024?
Yes, I was.
And do you recall how you first came into contact with Ashley Clinker?
Yes, she was brought back to my assignment, I believe, to room 25 back in the C-Pod. I don't recall what time. I do believe it was the afternoon. And the nurse who brought her back was Meg. And she explained to me that they had this patient separated from the general population in the lobby, which is more typical of what we do with patients when they're waiting to come back to a room, is just put them back out in the lobby. But there were concerns for her safety because of her companion. And so she gave me a quick rundown that Ms. Clinker had come in and somehow explained this injury to her face by saying that a mattress had fallen on her, that she was moving, but that when she was alone with the triage nurse, that she explained that she had been hit.
Now, I just want to refer, if you have the medical records in front of you there, I just want to refer you to page 17. It looks like at the bottom of page 17, I'm looking sort of for when you took over her care from triage.
Yes.
And it looks like 1747 you're assigned then as the registered nurse?
Yes. She probably came to the room earlier. It looks like somebody moved her, which is just a computer click, around 5:15. So that's likely when she came to the room.
Okay.
Or, sorry, it's 17:13. But then I just, when you start taking care of a patient, sometimes you're doing stuff before you have a chance to sit down in front of the computer and actually assign yourself so that other people know that that's who's taking care of the patient.
Understood. That's one of the things we sort of learned about is sort of when information gets pulled through the system or assigned to charted to the system as opposed to
Right.
sort of in real time, when is this care happening or something. So you believe that you contacted her when she first arrived in room C25?
Yes.
And were you when you first contacted her, were you there with Dr. Kreitzer, or did you meet with her alone first?
No, I met with her alone first.
Okay. So when you first contacted Ms. Clinker in room C25, what did you observe of her physical medical condition when you first contacted her?
Medically, she was alert and oriented, but she had this giant bruise on her right eye and quite a bit of swelling. And she, was mildly anxious and in a lot of pain.
All right. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit number 2. The State's Exhibit number 2, if you're looking at that, does that accurately look like what you recall of the injury that you observed when you first encountered her?
Yes.
Now, you said that she was in a lot of pain. What was that? What was that based upon? Did she express that to you, or you observed her acting in a way? Or
She was, very anxious, which in our line of work, we generally conclude that when a person is anxious about something that they have, plus an injury, that's obvious that they are in some kind of pain. So and then it's part of our normal course of business to ask them what their pain level is,
Okay.
which I did.
I was just going to ask you about that. So, can you explain for the court, how do you do a pain assessment when you first encounter a patient?
Are you sure?
It kind of depends on the ability of the patient to answer, but in her case, an alert and oriented patient who is capable of speaking, you simply give them a pain scale 0 to 10, 0 being no pain, 10 being the worst pain in the world that you can imagine. Obviously, it's going to be relative for each patient.
So I'm going to refer you to the top of page 18. What's listed as 17:49 is the time, so I think that's 5:49 p.m. Did you do a pain assessment with Ms. Klinker at that time?
I did.
And what was her assessment of her pain at that time?
10.
And I think you actually charted it as 10 worst pain ever.
Yes, that is an automatic. When you put in the pain score, it automatically loads the whole.
Okay. Is that the way that you describe it to the patient? Like between 1 and 10 is the worst you've ever had? Or is that a word that Ms. Klinker used? Or
That is a pre-set description that when you present it to the patient, again, the scale is 0 to 10, 0 being no pain, 10
Okay.
being the worst pain that you can imagine.
okay.
So-
And that's the way you typically present it to patients?
Correct.
And so Ms. Klinker's response was 10.
10. Yes.
Now, I see in the notes that based upon the injury and her complaints of pain, that oxycodone was prescribed for her.
Correct.
And that you presented that for her. We've heard testimony, oxycodone's a pain medication, it's an opiate-based pain medication.
Yes.
Now, during the initial contact with her, did you have any initial discussion with her about the mechanism of how she was injured?
I don't recall specifically the initial conversations because the main focus was getting her pain controlled. And then obviously, and you can see in the chart shortly thereafter, she went to CT, which is the scan that the physician ordered to.
This is 1 inch. This right here is 1 inch. Actually, just spread your finger from your thumb to your pinky is 1 inch. Bonjour, bonjour.
Look at her face, but in the meantime, when she came back from CT, I had an opportunity to talk with her and asked her, based on Meg's anecdote about the mattress story, and then recanting that in triage, saying that her boyfriend or fiance had hit her. I asked her about it and asked her if she wanted help.
Okay, so I want to take that back and kind of take it piece by piece. You approached her about this
Correct.
question, right? And we've heard some testimony that Ms. Klinker described that she had some conflict with the nursing staff, that she was, difficult to that the nursing staff, I think she described the nursing staff was bullying her or manipulating her. How would you describe your interactions with her during that time?
I was simply encouraging her to get some help. Because, I said, and I do recall telling her, I said, if this is true, there are resources available to you. We can get you the social worker here. We can get you referrals to shelters, et cetera, if you don't have another place to go. And then I think at that point, she started to tell me about the reasons why she couldn't report the problem.
Okay. Well, so in your characterization was.
Tomorrow we're going to hear his side. Tomorrow he gets on the stand and he explains his side, guys.
Was there any conflict between you and Miss Klinker? Was there?
No, not between the two of us.
Okay. And to your recollection of it, you didn't try to you tell her, this man did this to you.
No.
So I got a little sidetracked there, and I apologize. So
You're on fire today,
she
you
came
know
back
that.
from the CT scan, and you said you talked with her about the report that you had from Meg Walsh.
Correct.
So if you just go ahead.
Pardon me?
Just describe, if you can, for the judge, what happened in that interaction when she came back from CT?
I would say it was very back and forth. She appeared conflicted about telling me things, but at the same time would overshare, if you will. And there was a lot of justification that she voiced about why she wouldn't basically press charges against him for hitting her.
Did you ask her specifically about what you had learned from Meg about how she got hurt? Did you ask her, did she describe for you how it is that she got this injury?
She did say that he punched her.
Okay.
She did say that they were having an argument over a male friend of hers who I don't recall the relationship precisely, but it was an argument over a male friend of hers, and meaning that her boyfriend, she interchanged the words boyfriend and fiance, that he was mad that she had had some contact with this male friend, and that's why he struck her.
Okay. And so just so we're clear in terms of...
Can he break a skull in 3 places with one punch? I mean, is that practical? You think that he would break her skull in 3 places with one punch?
Your recollection, she specifically described that he struck her with his hand or...
Correct.
Or something, okay. Was there ever a point in which she said that, actually, on that, I think we kind of had a lot of testimony on this. Right. Did you ever ask her about the explanation about the mattress? Was there any, did the two of you have any discussion about sort of this mattress?
I told her, I don't believe I asked her, but I told her that the story about a mattress causing that injury to her, that was not believable.
Okay. So you didn't really discuss any of the details of her initial...
I've seen mattresses, and you can jump on an egg on mattresses, and the egg won't even crack, guys.
Full statement
No.
on the mattress. Okay. And so this conclusion that you came to that about her being injured by a mattress fall or something like that, you sound like you had already decided that was not plausible or not.
No, correct.
And
Correct.
Is that based on your prior medical experience with trauma patients? How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, trauma is generally, blunt force trauma.
Oh, that's what happened. Okay, I get it now. They were doing the wine thing, where you put the wine on the mattress and then you drop the bowling ball on the mattress. That would make sense.
Requires some significant momentum and transfer of energy that generally does not occur from a mattress, and I probably made that conclusion because I've moved over 30 times in my life, and I have always moved myself, so I've moved a lot of mattresses. They're not very wieldy objects, and they do fall over quite a bit, and I've never checked myself into the emergency department with a broken orbit or brain bleed.
So Was it something about the nature of the injuries themselves that led you to that conclusion?
Yes, the swelling around her eye was significant. The pain was persistent, and the bruising was, as you saw from the picture, really, I mean, it was horrendous. It almost looked like she'd been hit with a metal pipe.
Now, in your time treating trauma patients, have you treated people who have taken falls?
Falls, yes.
And in your experience, does a person who falls from height, from standing, do they generally have injuries, like attempts to try to catch themselves type?
Yes, they'll have like a skin tear or broken wrist or, some injury on another part of their body.
And in your examination, your time with Ms. Klinker, did she complain of any injuries to any other areas other than the eye injury?
No.
And in terms of your observations of her, did you observe any injuries to her wrists, elbows, knees, anything like that?
No.
And have you ever treated patients who fell flat sort of on their face, like they
Yes.
hit their face on something, right? And based on your experience, your medical training, your experience dealing with trauma patients, would you expect to see injuries to the nose, chin, cheek, some kind of other?
Yes, some of the more prominent features would definitely be injured. And again, if you were to fall to the side, you would generally injure like your shoulder or something else first before your face would be injured.
And did you observe any of those types of injuries, hip, shoulder, elbow?
No.
That sort of thing?
Hey, that wasn't your elbow. He patted his butt and said elbow. Oh, where's Snoopy?
You said that Miss Klinker specifically told you that her boyfriend, fiance had struck her in the face.
Yes.
And in your time as a medical professional working in trauma, have you ever treated other patients who have been struck, punched in the face?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Maybe back at the very beginning when I was on the med-surg floor.
Okay.
Maybe some trauma then, but that would have been far removed from an emergency room moment.
Do you, you said that Ms. Klinker had offered, had expressed to you that she was not interested in pressing charges.
Correct.
And, but did she make any statements to you about previous incidents of abuse by her boyfriend, fiance?
She did. She said that was the reason that she didn't want to press charges. And frankly, when she first brought it up, it was a little vague. She made it seem like there were pending charges against her boyfriend that would cause him to, that would cause this further charges to be catastrophic for.
Yeah. He currently has present charges against him. Anybody want to guess what his present charges might possibly be?
Him. But she didn't really say what they were until later on in the conversation. We had conversation, one long conversation that was in small parts when I was in and out of the room. But that she did say that at one point that he had tried to strangle her. And that was one of the charges.
Strangulation.
That was, in quotes, pending against him.
Ms. Galla, we've heard other testimony that public safety eventually came to escort Mr. Back out of the, he ended up coming back to.
Correct.
And were you there when he was back there?
Yes, and that may be the reason why Ms. Klinker described a relation, or our interaction as bullying or something of discord. Mr. Back, she asked that he come back. She got very frustrated with our efforts to help her have access to resources that would help her, as an independent woman. And she asked to have him come back. And when he was allowed back to the room, that's when the results from her CT scan were finalized. And I had to go in and tell her that she couldn't drink through a straw because of the injuries that she had to her face. And she asked about the further injuries. And so that's when the relationship between the two of them, because it seemed pretty quiet at first when he came back, but then there was a lot of whispering and swearing that quickly became like yelling and swearing after we talked about the injury to her face and what the extent was.
Do you recall, in terms of things that that Ms. Klinker said during that time after she found out about the CT scan results, do you remember anything that she said about that?
Not particularly. I do remember that she was very upset, that she started crying almost immediately when she found out that her orbit was broken and that her brain was bleeding.
And what about Mr. Back, her fiance who had come back? What was his demeanor? What was his reaction when they found out?
He had almost none. He was just sitting back in the corner, just glaring at people.
So it sounds like you said this sort of situation became more tense.
Correct.
And I know we heard from Wendy Bowen that I think that a decision was made to have public safety come and escort him out.
Yes, when they started yelling and swearing really loud and disrupting other patients, I called for public safety to come back to the room. And that's when they initially, engaged Mr. Back. And I don't have a clear recollection of at what point he left. And that public safety, I don't know. I just do know that they came back to the room and engaged him, and then he ended up leaving.
Okay. And you did provide a written statement
I did.
Of her statements to you. You provided a written statement to public safety about that.
Correct.
And it looks like you went off shift around 7. And
Correct.
Wendy Bowen took over her care from there.
Yes.
Those are all the questions I have for you, Ms. Galla. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbs. Any questions? Nurse Galla.
Hello.
My name is Jonathan Gibbs. I'm counsel for the defendant in this matter. Earlier, you mentioned in preparation for providing testimonies today that you had some casual discussions with the other nurses. Could you elaborate on that?
Are you going to court? Yes, I'm going to court. I got a subpoena. It was kind of like that.
Did you discuss any of the underlying issues at all?
Not particularly. Like I said, the nature of our work is you kind of have to be in the moment that you're in. Otherwise, you miss out on stuff that has to be done. So it's, you're walking by somebody in the unit. Are you going? Yeah, I'm going.
Of course. Prosecutor mentioned the other nurse told you concerning an allegation of it not being an accident. Is that correct?
She told me what the patient had said in triage.
And what do you recall of her, like what she said specifically?
She said when the patient first got here, she told someone that she got hit by a mattress falling over. And then when she was back in triage, she said that her boyfriend had hit her. We ask a standard question, do you feel safe at home? And I believe it was in the context of that it came up.
Okay. Did Ms. Klinker appear intoxicated at all to you at this time?
No.
Okay. It was mentioned earlier, the subjective pain number. I believe Ms. Klinker said 10 out of 10. Is that correct?
Yes.
In your experience as a nurse, do you ever find that people sometimes exaggerate that subjective number in the effort to obtain pain medication?
Because it's subjective, it is simply zero pain or the worst pain that you can imagine.
All right, going on to your direct interactions with Ms. Clinker, and I'm not trying to be overly repetitive here, but again, I just want to be sure to understand to the best of your recollection exactly what that conversation consisted of. So would you mind walking me through that?
Which conversation?
When you're with Ms. Clinker and you've taken over care of her, how the discussion went back and forth between you to the point of where, as you told the prosecutor, you claimed that she said that Mr. Back struck her. Is that correct?
So when she first came in the room, I just assessed her pain and gave her the oxycodone, and then she left for CT. When she came back from CT, I told her what the other nurse had told me, and I said, "Did he hit you?" And she said, "Yes, he did."
Okay. The prosecution mentioned earlier that typically in a fall injury, someone's going to have additional area, be it elbows, nose, what have you, showing an injury as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
In your experience, do you ever find that if someone is intoxicated when they fall, it's less likely that their reflexes are going to kick in and cause those injuries?
I don't know. I mean, we do get patients who are intoxicated, but I mean,
In your experience, typically if someone is intoxicated, when an injury happens to them, are their reflexes maybe diminished or less likely to kick in?
well, I think that that's pretty common knowledge, but I mean, we weren't focused on a fall. We were focused on the fact that she said that her boyfriend hit her.
I understand. You mentioned earlier, and I think most people would agree,
I
a
don't mind
mattress hitting someone is very unlikely to cause someone an injury.
Correct.
Understand that. However, if someone was bumped by a mattress and fell and made physical contact with either a piece of furniture or a hard plastic container, a tote of some type, could that possibly cause a facial injury?
I don't know. I mean, you would have to give me a very specific situation in order for me to answer that accurately.
I guess my question is, looking at the injury that Ms. Clinker has,
Yeah.
obviously it would be impossible. A mattress hitting would not cause that injury.
Correct.
And we all agree that. However, if she had fallen and made contact with a piece of furniture or some type of item, perhaps a plastic container of some type that would be around during the course of a move, could that potentially, in your opinion, cause an injury of that nature?
I don't think a plastic container could do that. I mean, she had significant blunt force trauma to her face right here.
No further questions?
Nothing on redirect.
All right, thank you for what you do.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming in.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for what you
Can
do.
we take a break? I didn't get to go to the bathroom when we had the hearing on
No,
Mr.
you hold
Levin's
it.
case, so
You're
we
an
could take a
adult.
short
I'm
break.
afraid if I said no, I'd regret it.
Okay, so remember, she's over here. During all that testimony, she's on the prosecutor's side. Tomorrow it gets better. Tomorrow we hear from him. Tomorrow we get body cam footage. I think we're done with the nurses and all the medical now. We don't get her. We don't get her on the stand. We get her in the body cam, so we get to hear what she says, and we get to see him. He's way different in body cam than he is in court today. I can't wait till tomorrow. I wish I could just go on and on and on and on. Oh, I forgot one thing. So, yeah, I'm sorry about yesterday. Not yesterday. I know my days 2 days ago when I was in the stream. I don't know what happened. It's never happened before. It's the weirdest thing. I had this huge headache in the back of my head. Did you ever get a headache? And I've never gotten a headache in the back of my head before, but it started to make me feel sick during the stream. So I had to stop the stream. Happy birthday, Kay! Oh my gosh, your birthday. You have so many things going on right now. Man, we need this month to be over for you. We do, unless we're drunk. She was drinking. So, if she was drunk and falling, she might not put her arm out. Her head might hit right into that plastic bin. And I think the nurse is wrong. I think if you fall correctly on a plastic bin, you can break your face in 3 places. You can. I mean, you just can. So, I'm not saying that's what happened to her, and I'm not saying that's not what happened to her, because don't forget, we haven't heard his side yet. Y'all making judgments based on facts. I don't know why you're doing that when we haven't heard him talk yet. Don't base anything off facts until you heard his words. All right. Thank you for coming out. You're going to be bumped right over to the OJ stream, so I'll see some of you there. I hope you guys have a great, great, great day. See ya.
Got these life that goes digital dreams through the screen. Her blue eyes gleam. Wicked humor, sharp as a knife. Her stream sparks electric light. Late night when the world sleeps, she's the friend that always keeps. Giggles roll like thunder loud. She stands out in any crowd. Kathy's love cuts through the gloom. Eyes blue like a summer's bloom. Her humor dark and twisted sharp. In a way, there's no alarm. Freedom tales late into the night. Her laughter feels just right. Even when my world turns gray, with a giggle she lights the way. Her eyes hear a sky so blue. In her jokes there's a truth so true. With each stream she brings the light, turns dark days into bright. Kathy's laugh cuts through the gloom. Eyes blue like a summer's bloom. Her humor dark and twisted sharp. In a way, there's no alarm. Streaming tales late into the night. Her laughter feels just right. Even when my world turns gray, with a giggle she lights the way. Kathy's laugh cuts through the gloom. Eyes blue like a summer's bloom. Her humor dark and twisted sharp. In a way, there's no